Thank you so much for joining the Judaism Demystified podcast. I want to start by saying that we're very grateful for the friendly relationship Jews enjoy today with Christians and hope it stays that way. We're not interested in proselytizing or converting anyone to Judaism. The purpose of this discussion is about counteracting and defending ourselves from the aggressive missionary recruitment of generally uneducated Jews. So now that we got that out of the way, the first question is, you're the daughter of a former pastor turned Noahide. You were raised as a missionary who converted many Jews to Christianity. Can you tell our listeners about your journey that led to your eventual conversion to Judaism? And what was your family's reaction?
Oh, first, thank you for having me. Yes, I'm a Ger. I was born to an evangelical Christian family. My father was an evangelical minister with the Assemblies of God. I, like most evangelicals, was trained from a very young age to be a Christian missionary, to bring Jesus to the world. The Great Commission is a scripture in the New Testament. It's from Jesus himself. It's a commandment that every evangelical Christian follows. It's taken very seriously. I took it very seriously. It's to bring Jesus to the entire world. So from a young child, I was taught to do this with a world focus, and that was telling people that they are with sin. Everybody is with sin, and that we're not perfect, and that we can't possibly stand before a perfect, holy God in our sinful and blemished condition, that we needed forgiveness. And the only way to get forgiveness was a sacrifice, just like you learned in the, to me, it was the Old Testament, that a sacrifice was required for sin, and that Jesus was without sin, and he was the ultimate sacrifice, and it's because of him that our sins are forgiven. And without that forgiveness for sin, we can't have a relationship with God. And you're also taught from a very young age that hell is a very real place, and it is like an eternity of torture and lake of fire, and it's pretty scary, and you're terrified of that from a child. So it's something that it comes from a place of love and concern for people. Nobody wants that to happen to their friend or somebody that they care about. And it was the same when my focus changed to the Jewish world. As an adult, that focus took a turn more towards Jews, which was a completely different type of evangelizing.
Was that your own choice, or was that the choice of, like, let's say your father told you to focus on Jews?
Is there a specific aspect of turning towards Jews in Christian?
There is. I was raised in an evangelical Christian church. It was a denomination called the Assemblies of God. And when I became an adult, they had taken on a mission and changed their focus more towards Judaism. And they were learning the Jewish traditions. They were getting away from the more, what they were saying were pagan aspects of Christianity, and getting rid of that. And there was a focus on learning the Hebraic roots of the Christian faith and trying to follow Christianity as Jesus followed Christianity. And of course, along with that was the proselytizing part. When you walk into a Messianic synagogue, which is what my church had morphed into, you don't see crosses. You don't see the typical things that you see in Christianity. You see an Aron, you see a Torah that they bring out, you see a bima. The men are wearing a talit. They're wearing tzitzit. Often they have their, belt loop, tied to the belt loop kind of tzitzit, but they're wearing kippot. You'll see a giant menorah. All of the aspects of tradition and the icons and symbols of Judaism, you'll find, in a Messianic synagogue. All the appearances of being Jewish, but it's not. It's actually it was something that was invented in the 70s. The Messianic movement was birthed in the 70s. It was a response to the problem of not being able to convert Jews to Christianity. And there was a whole convention in Switzerland. You probably spoke to Rabbi Singer about it. He talks about how the Messianic movement was birthed. And one of their biggest problems was the cultural connection that Jews have, and that most Jews, whether they're secular, religious, all types of Jews, they strongly identify as a culture, and no matter what, they don't want to convert, and they don't want to not be Jewish. Even Jews who don't know anything about Judaism say, I was born a Jew, I will die a Jew. And they feel that very strongly. So Christianity had to come up with a way to get around that. So they did. And that was, at the beginning, it was called church planting, cultural church planting. And it was learning the culture and the traditions of whatever that is. That they've also done it in other cultures, Hispanic cultures, Russian culture. And in Judaism, they learn the Jewish culture, and they take on the symbols and icons so that it's more palatable for a Jew to accept. It blurs the lines and makes a Jew more comfortable, because a Jew's not comfortable going into a church. Jews generally don't like to hear the word Jesus Christ. It doesn't invoke any warm and fuzzy feelings. So
yeah, but is there a specific type of Jew that you targeted? Because obviously, if you're targeting like an Orthodox Jew, you're not really gonna, be successful for the most part. Mm-hmm. But were you targeting more like uneducated Jews, Reform, or was it like anything goes?
When I first started, it was the more secular, the Reform and conservative, the ones that I found at the JCC. I would join classes at the JCC. I found them pretty easy to reach, mostly using the techniques that I had learned when I was, anybody else with that very world focus. As long as I would talk a little bit about the Jewish traditions and use a little bit of a Jewishy language, I fit in, and they would listen, and they were open to hearing it. As I got a little more brave, I tried to encounter some Orthodox Jews. I was actually obsessed with Orthodox Jews. I loved watching them. I loved that they seemed to constantly have some sort of connection to God. They were always saying a blessing. I just couldn't imagine how somebody so religious, somebody who's doing all of these things, praying 3 times a day, saying a blessing over every little thing that they do, how can they not have a relationship with God? Which to me, that was Jesus. I just couldn't imagine how somebody so religious and so committed didn't have, that was meaningless. So I thought it would be beautiful to give them that relationship with Jesus.
I see.
And set out to do that, because I felt that was what God wanted from me. I had grown up knowing that God wanted a relationship with his people, and that the Jews were blinded, that there were scales over their eyes, And until those blinders were lifted from their eyes, they couldn't possibly have a connection with God. And I wanted to help bring that about. So I set out to convert Orthodox Jews. And that wasn't easy at all.
The other way easy? Like, did you have a good success rate before you got to
I did. And in Christianity, you're taught to target the most vulnerable, the people who are needy, the very young and the very old. When you volunteer for Meals on Wheels, you're in touch with elderly people every day, taking those meals to them, and they are lonely. They are dying of loneliness, and they will talk about anything, and they're not always completely with it. So they'll say yes to everything, and that sounds great, and you can share Jesus with them very easily.
Wow.
And they're pretty open to it.
Wow.
And very, very young. How many young people, especially teenagers, are not struggling with some sort of identity, trying to find themselves, always feeling vulnerable. I'm not good enough. I'm not accepted. I don't fit here. I don't feel that. They're in your teenage years. You're confused, and you also want to act big and like I'm open to everything, and I want to like discover things for myself, and I want to think for myself, and being open and is sort of it's cool to be open and think of new things and out of the box, and it's also
there's a rebelliousness there also.
Right, a little bit of rebelling, and this is taboo, and this is something I'm not supposed to be doing. So that's exactly what I'm going to do.
And Christianity appeals, like the whole idea of Jesus, it really appeals to people who are troubled, because people who are, let's say, there's a lot of born agains who struggled with alcohol, and they struggle. You see that, and whenever people are recovering addicts, they usually turn to this, because for them it's like this, it's like a teddy bear almost. It's there's this feeling that like all the sins I've done and everything bad that I've done, all I need to do is just turn to this one God, and it doesn't really require a lot of effort. It's kind of just
pretty
like
much.
Yeah, pretty much. So there is an appeal to it, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
There is, but it appeals to people with very low self-esteem, and somebody who has hit rock bottom or is struggling with some sort of desperate situation is often when they'll find Christianity, or somebody's able to reach them, or just somebody who plain needs to be loved and wants to be accepted and have people reach out to them.
To belong.
It's a terrible, terrible joke, but there is some truth to it. They say when you go into a church, when you open the door, everybody's welcoming you. They ask you do you have a meal? Do you have somewhere to be? Do you need a place to sleep? Do you need a wife? They take care of you, and everybody recognizes you and is friendly, very opening, welcoming. There's a terrible joke that the first 5 words you hear when you walk into a shul is "You're in my seat."
That's great.
Which is bad, but in many ways it's true. We do need to step up our game. We need to be more compassionate and outreach and recognize each other and treat ourselves a little better.
For sure.
Especially as Israelis, we don't have the greatest reputation for being friendly and social and polite.
But I think this has a lot to do with the continual exile and the constant threat of death and constantly being at war, that Jews in general have our BS radar on, and we're skeptical by nature, and
guard is up.
We challenge, and the Torah says that we're stiff-necked people. We don't. This is why it's also why we don't proselytize. We say you're sitting in my seat because we're not really interested in we're not really looking to turn other people on per se, but there's a lot to what you're saying. And
100%, you're 100% right, though. 100%. That's something that, we need to work on collectively. 100%. 100%.
sure.
So you were saying that you started to set your sights onto the Orthodox group.
I did, but that wasn't as easy because the Orthodox knew a lot of the scriptures, and the emotional appeal of everybody's sinned and needs forgiveness for sin, that wasn't working at all with them. And I learned that there was a whole new way to evangelize religious Jews. And that was really stepping up the game with incorporating culture and language and making everything you say and do and look, all of it, making it more Jewishy. And I also had to learn the text. I had to learn all of the prophecies that fulfilled all of the prophecies in Tanakh that Christianity teaches is fulfilled by Jesus. And there's like some 300 something. So I decided I was going to memorize every single one. And
But you had to learn the Hebrew also? Or
I didn't quite learn the Hebrew. I knew I would learn in the English what it was.
but you're using
And I would
King James version still, or were you actually
right, but I'm speaking to English speaking Jews, and I would not quote from the New Testament. I would quote from what to me was the Old Testament, because if I brought the New Testament, they for sure weren't going to accept that at all. But if I said, Jesus is in your Tanakh, I can prove that Jesus is the Messiah through your own Bible, your Tanakh. If we go through it, I can show you that Jesus is bouncing off of every page. And that challenge worked, and they would listen to me and they'd say, show me. And I would show them in Tanakh the prophecies that were fulfilled by Jesus. But a lot of the ones that I encountered weren't accepting that. A lot of them were ready for me. They made fun of me. They challenged me quite a bit. They seemed to have cue cards, like answers to everything that I brought to them. They would make accusations like that I was taking things out of context, or that I was mistranslating things, or that things didn't, that doesn't exactly say what you say that it means in Hebrew. So I kept hitting a brick wall with them, and I realized that I needed to learn a whole lot more in order to reach these Jews who, religious Jews, a lot of them, they study Torah all day long. They were definitely way ahead of the game, more so than I was. So I went back and I decided to answer what their challenges were, which was the verses that I was taking were out of context. So out of context means I need to not only memorize the one verse that I had memorized, but I need to know the whole chapter, and I need to be able to present the context that Jesus had fulfilled that prophecy, not just the one verse. The ones that were mistranslated, I decided one by one, I'll learn those verses in Hebrew and show that it's not mistranslated and that Jesus is in the verse, even in the Hebrew. And I didn't do that very successfully. I started to learn the context, and I got very confused because when I was reading it in context, it didn't exactly fit the narrative that I was presenting anymore. I was having trouble myself coming to terms with it. And so I picked out some of the most difficult ones, the ones that I thought that I wasn't having so much of a problem with. I took one-to-one Orthodox Jew and asked, this one's pretty solid. It's a chapter, and if you read it to me in the Hebrew, you'll see Jesus in that. And he did. He read it to me in Hebrew. And if you read it, it really does sound like Jesus. And this Orthodox Jew became very upset. I could tell he was irritated. I thought that I had him. I thought that he saw Jesus in that verse. And he said, I can't help you anymore. This is really becoming a problem. And I thought, he's going to go back to his rabbi. I know he's going to listen to his rabbi. And I knew that Orthodox Jews listen to their rabbis, and their rabbis are constantly telling them to, stay away from this. And one of my lines to get them to look at it was very much like, you approach any rebellious person. Your rabbi doesn't want you to look at this because your rabbi doesn't want you to know the truth, which also worked.
So you had some success, you're saying, with
I had some success in challenging them, getting them to look at it with me, and getting them to help me with the Hebrew, or at least look at it. They would, but they were still coming at me with answers. But there was this one that couldn't answer me anymore and didn't know how to answer me. So he gave me a tape set, back when there was tapes, cassette tapes. And that was Rabbi Tovia Singer. And I thought that I'd hit the jackpot. I thought it was a counter missionary, and it was it says it was Judaism's response to Christian missionaries. So it was all of the responses that they were giving me in a tape set, something that I could take home and one by one learn and tear apart. And I thought that was great, because this is the guy,
like a cheat sheet.
Right? This is the guy that they're listening to, and this is like it's like the playbook from the other team.
Yeah, cheat sheet.
So I thought it was great. So I did. I set out to counter missionary, and I thought it was going to be a piece of cake. I could do it at home. I wasn't in like a position where I was being harassed, and I'll do it, and then I'll go back to them. And as I went through each of the things that Rabbi Singer presented, I couldn't counter a single one of them. Each one of them fell apart. And piece by piece, my whole faith was, coming undone. It was like pulling a thread, and the whole rug was just ripped out from under me. And it was traumatic. So that you asked how that came about. That was how that came about.
Did you ever consider taking Rabbi Singer's points and going to like a priest or like a Christian scholar or pastor or whatever to see if they can give you a satisfactory answer? Or were you
I did. I was in a missionary training class at the time. I took it to one of my classes. They didn't appreciate it. And the pastor there told me that, you have to believe in faith. And I said, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to make sense. God doesn't make sense. And there are things that we just believe. And in Christianity, it's very much not like Judaism in that way. You're not supposed to question. And if you question, you lack faith. And I was as committed as you could be to my faith and trying to follow through with this mission of bringing people to Jesus. So to me, when he said you lack faith, I found that offensive and hurtful. And I don't lack faith. This just isn't making sense. And he couldn't explain it to me. I went to a couple of other pastors, and the response was always the same. You're looking at it from an intellectual way, and you can't do that. You know, you have to believe in, by faith, which didn't quite make sense. If it just takes faith, then you can have faith in anything.
Exactly.
I was
why
exactly this? So it continued to fall apart, which is what led me down the path of conversion. Of course, I didn't go directly to conversion. I did go through a time period where I was very angry. I felt betrayed by the church. I felt betrayed by God. Was there a God at all? Is faith anything? Does God exist? I was very angry. I think I went through every stage of grief. And then I was sad. I felt like when I left the church, I no longer had my support system, my friends, my family. At the time, I wasn't telling anybody. I was doing all of this, alone, which felt very alone. I guess it was traumatic. It was like I lost something that was like very precious to me, and I decided that I was going to angrily call this rabbi. So I called up Rabbi Singer, a little ticked off, and said, I get that this stuff is out of context. I get that there's no God. I get that all of everything that I believed is wrong, but could you possibly tell me that like maybe there was some purpose to something? Like maybe there was some meaning to Jesus's life? Did he exist at all? Is there some sort of historical Jesus that I can understand? And his answer was, that's not really the answer you're looking for. I hear your question, but you're trying to come to grips with the fact that Jesus is not the Messiah, and you want to be able to file away Jesus, in a nice little way of how do I identify who he was and what he was in my life. But
closure, like in a way, like closure,
like what was this? And he says, but the truth is, if he's not the Messiah, and if none of those verses prove that he fulfilled any of the prophecies and he's really not the Messiah, then nothing else matters. None of this matters. Whether he's existed or not doesn't matter. Which was simple. It made sense, but it didn't make me feel any better, because I was still struggling with, then that means there's no God. And how do I, as somebody who was so grounded in faith and so connected, and I do feel like God is there, how do I deal with the fact that there is no God? And he told me, you're totally wrong. You've just found out Jesus is not the Messiah, but God is still very much there for you. The Tanakh is still there. The Torah is still true. And I realized that in my upbringing, Jesus and God was one, and I hadn't learned to separate them yet. And when I was able to separate that and say God was still there, and at least the foundation of what I believed, the Tanakh, was absolutely true, and that I knew that it had been mistranslated, that it was taken out of context, and that I needed to learn it from the beginning, from scratch. So I set out to do that. And
this whole time, did your parents pick up on this?
They were noticing things. They knew that I wasn't going to church. or for some time they thought that I was like checking out the Jewish synagogues because I was still trying to convert people. They noticed that I was taking on more of the traditions than I had in the past. My son, who was little bitty, 4 years old, was wearing a kippah and tzitzit, and I had started going through the conversion process, but wasn't telling them. When they came to my house, I would turn the books backwards so they didn't see any Hebrew, and I kept that up for a while.
So you already had a family of your own? You already had children?
I was a single mother. I had 2 children at home, little ones. And I kept that up until my father one time came over. I'd been going through the conservative movement. I wasn't converted yet. So I was attending a conservative shul on a Friday night. He was coming to my house, and I had not made it home yet and realized that I had left everything out on the table, all of the different Bibles, the Hebrew, the translations, and Rabbi Singer's work and my notes. I left everything out.
Right.
And he was going to find it. And I was terrified. I knew as soon as I walked in, I was going to get a lecture. My father's a very military type man. He's a police officer, a preacher, which is a very disciplined, strict type personality. So when I came in, sure enough, he had everything, and he was looking through it and said, "We need to talk." So I sat down with him, and he said he noticed that I had been dressing differently, we're eating differently, we're behaving differently, and it's obvious that you're getting involved in a cult. So not exactly, but I do have some questions that I need to ask. There's a lot that I'm going through, and I've been going through it alone. So, I'm sort of relieved that you've found this, and maybe we can talk about it, and maybe we can learn together, and maybe you can show me some things. So we started doing that. I showed him some of the things that I was looking at, and just like my pastor and teachers that I had taken it to before, he couldn't answer them. But unlike them, he did not say you have to believe blindly and with faith. He was honest and said, these are serious questions, and I need to look at this myself. I'm not going to be able to answer them tonight, but we'll come back to this, and I'll find out the answers, and we'll go through this. I thought for sure that was going to buy me a week, 2 weeks, because gosh, Rabbi Singer has, like, I think it's 24 audios, and they're like an hour each. It was like a lot to go through. So I gave it to him, and he went to bed. I went to bed. Of course, to me, that was my whole life felt like it was sort of exploding with my father finding out everything I was doing. And when he really gets into what I've been doing, he's going to find out that I have flat out rejected Jesus. And that is huge. And what's he going to do when he comes to the realize that I don't believe any of it anymore, and that there's no possible way to answer these questions without rejecting Jesus completely. And in his mind, I'm going to go to hell, and this is like the worst of the worst. So I didn't sleep because I was like pending doom. And I could hear in the other room the rabbi's voice. He was listening to all of those audios, and every time the rabbi, would bring out a specific point, I was like holding my breath. What's he thinking about that one? And how's he going to take that? So that was hours. And at 3:00 in the morning, he came knocking on my door. and asked if I was awake. And I was, of course, awake. And he came in and he just sat on the edge of my bed, and he didn't say anything. And he was staring at the wall in this like catatonic state and just like didn't know what to say, I guess. And I said, "Daddy, what's going on?" He said, "That rabbi was right." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "That rabbi is right about everything." I took my Bible in there and I tried to counter it. I tried to answer these questions, and I can't. He's right about everything. The Jews are right. And I was shocked. He said the rug was pulled out from under him. I said, "I feel exactly the same way." And then he was confused and said, what do we do now?" I said, "Well, that's what I'm doing now. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm learning from scratch. I think I'm going to do the conversion process. That's what I'm doing now." And he left Christianity. He's no longer a minister. Like you said from the beginning, he did choose to become a Noahide. I chose to convert. He told me that he was too old. He said, "This is too much for me." He says, "It's enough for me to put it behind and say, I don't believe that anymore. That's not something I subscribe to anymore. But I can't learn a whole new language, a whole new culture, a whole new religion." And thank God there's a Beyneynu movement. There's all different groups all around the world. I've come to know so many of them. They're beautiful, beautiful people. And he identifies as a Noahide. He connects here and there with different Noahide communities. He's very supportive of me. He loves the work that I'm doing. He comes out to lectures. He's come to Israel quite a few times.
That is incredible.
That's amazing. Amazing.
That is just an incredible story. What about your mother?
My mother didn't take it so well. I explained it to her, and she said she'd been that way for 40 years. She didn't want to change. I showed her, I told her, I explained it like the Matrix. I felt like I had been unplugged and saw the truth. And she said, "Plug me back in. I don't want it." And
it's very understandable.
That's actually a scene in the Matrix.
It's understandable.
Right.
Not eating the steak. I don't care if this is ignorance is bliss. I want it. I want the steak.
Right. It's too difficult. And when you have a very emotional connection, which I know it's very difficult for Jews to understand, the emotional connection that Christians have to this figure, Jesus, because in all reality, it's an imaginary friend. But this is something you're taught from when you're a child, and this is somebody who's one with you, and you wake up every day talking to that person and going throughout your day with them, and you believe that that person is with you through everything. And you focus your entire life, everything you do in your day-to-day activities, everything you're focused on, you set your goals to be pleasing to God, and you want to do what Jesus wanted you to do. He becomes your core. And when you lose that, that's devastating. And to my mother, hell was a very real place, and I was going to hell. And that was very difficult for her to come to terms with. And it wasn't just me. I was going to hell, and I was taking her grandchildren with me. So that was hard.
Were your parents married at the time, or they were?
They're divorced.
Okay.
There's also she she accused me of destroying the family with this decision, which I hear about. I hear Ballet Tshuva doing the same thing.
Yes, but was your father still married to her when he started his journey to become a Noahide?
No,
Oh.
They had divorced when I was very young.
This was after.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So before we get to the next question, I do want to know, because being you chose to become a convert, unlike your father, and in many ways, there's a lot more pros of being a Noahide than being a convert to Judaism, because it comes with a lot of stigmas. Unfortunately, it should really be the most celebrated thing, where somebody who's choosing to join the nation, they're under so much scrutiny, and there's labeling of children and all that stuff. You want to marry off your children, and why did you choose to go all the way? Because you're not required to.
Right. Both choices are difficult in their own way, but I see becoming a Noahide as a very, very difficult choice. It's not easy. But most people say, when you convert to Judaism, you're taking on a whole different lifestyle. You're taking on, 613 mitzvot. You have lots of commandments you have to keep. You have lots of day-to-day restrictions that you have to constantly live with. There's so much that you can't do. Why would somebody choose that when you could do anything you want and not be obligated to anything? Why would you choose that? But in many ways, I feel I took the easy road. That being a B'nai Noach is much harder than the choice that I made. I don't see all of the 613 mitzvot as restrictions. I see them as, wonderful blessings that Hashem has given us. Shabbat is an amazing, amazing thing. I don't see it as the day that I can't do things. In any Orthodox Jew and somebody who really keeps Shabbat, you do a lot, and women do a lot on Shabbat. It's not a day of no work. It's a day that you focus on your family. It's a day that you focus on Hashem. It's a day that you separate from everything and really connect and recharge. And I don't think anybody really understands Shabbat until you keep it. And then there's the sense of community. You can go anywhere in the world and you can find a Chabad house, you can find a Jewish community, and there are people who are going to take you in anywhere like family. It's a huge family. And your children, it's, everybody helps everybody, and everybody, raises each other's kids. And anytime there's a crisis, the Jewish community is coming together. They're watching each other all the time. And as a Noahide, you don't have that. You don't have that sense of community. There are Noahide movements, but there are very few. Worldwide, there's quite a few, but they're very spread out, and there's not a community. There's not a church, a shul, a place for them to gather. They might have yearly gatherings, an annual get together. They might have some online things. But the world that we came from, Christianity, when I was in church almost every day. It was a nonstop social gathering. So it was your social life, your emotional support. It was everything, and you lose that sense of community and that family. And many people, in a very literal way, lose their church family and their physical, blood family at the same time, and feel very alone. And to not have another community to latch onto it's devastating for a lot of them. I get a lot of messages of what do I do and how do I deal with this, and it's a very painful place to be, and I don't envy them at all. It's very difficult.
And I think what you're trying to say is that, like, by entering the Jewish community and by taking upon yourself all the mitzvot, you are viewing it as essentially like a window towards self-fulfillment that a Noahide doesn't have the opportunity to engage in. And the sense of
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You're part of something, and some part of something real, and that you have something that you play out and connect to every day of your life. We have, we live in tight-knit Jewish communities where our neighbors are, everybody around us is part of our community, our teachers, our doctors, our, everything.
And have you dealt with other people, like friends or relatives, who actually also saw the light and wanted to kind of get guidance on how to, get out of it?
In the work that I do, I worked with Rabbi Singer for many years. So I do deal with a lot of people who are in that stage of coming out. So I have lots of conversations with people, and then my story going public now, people who are either my story triggered them to look at it themselves, or they were already looking and found that and then saw my story and connect to me. I get a lot of messages all the time asking what to do and how to handle things, and how to handle their family. I do have close family friends of mine who I feel like are on the verge, and there's an internal conflict in my own mind because I know the pain of losing family members. I've watched, a lot of times marriages don't survive. One of them discovers this and the other doesn't, and dealing with that your spouse has rejected Jesus is it's huge.
Yep.
And a lot of marriages don't survive that, and it tears apart families. It does. And that's difficult. So when I see it happening, on one hand, it's like they're going to find the truth, and I sort of feel excited for them, but at the same time, I know the pain that they're about to go through, and that this is not an easy path to take, and love them, and I would not want to see their family torn apart. Sure. So there's a little bit of an internal conflict of even leading somebody that's not quite there yet. I really try to make sure that they find it on their own, and that it's not because I was pushing that, because that in my mind would lower us Jews to the same as proselytizing, and I don't want to do that.
I understand. That actually, you actually led into our third question, which you sort of answered. I guess we can just recap. Well, what we wanted to ask you was that every religion has its fair share of cults, Judaism included. One of the signs you're in a cult is when you're told to shut off your critical thinking part of your brain. Your story is about having the courage to live according to truth, that which goes against everything you were ever taught. We wanted to ask you, what's your advice to others who are in a similar situation? The struggle becomes difficult when family dynamics are involved. You actually just spoke about that right now.
And it's very easy to shatter people's world, and you kind of always have to give them something else to hold on to. Otherwise, like you said before, you were lucky to have Rabbi Singer, and yes, your world didn't fall apart and collapse. Like, your world was shattered, but you had someone helping you pick up the pieces and to give you something else. So, the concern is that even Jews who are in other cults, for example, within Judaism, let's just say, they might decide, hey, you know what? I'm seeing the truth somewhere else, but how do I make this move? Because I have to give up so much. I've committed myself so much to an idea and to a figure, let's just say. and now I don't want to be left with nothing. So how do you?
And the same also with if you take a secular person, an atheist. I mean, it's in all contexts. We tend to, when we live our lives a certain way, we devote our lives a certain way, family, friends, and it's very difficult, even when you're starting to come to realize that there's another path which has justification and worth looking into. It's hard to move off because of the reasons that you've been sharing. So I think what Benji was trying to say is that it should never be about tearing people's worlds apart. It should be more about how to build a person's how to build anew, right? A person's conceptions, right? And how to.
It did destroy my life. It did blow up my world, but I am very thankful. I would not have chosen another way. I feel very blessed. The burden of guilt and shame and that low self-esteem that you sort of are indoctrinated in having in Christianity feels lifted. It feels like the most freeing thing, which surprised me, because at the same time I'm like dealing with tremendous loss, but oh my gosh, I feel free. And only somebody who's been through that understands that. And I think the most important thing is I don't accept anything at face value anymore. I question everything, which is something I never did before, because I kind of said, oh, that's if it's truth. And there are so many that we say are drinking the Kool-Aid. Right. And I don't want to ever feel that I'm doing that anymore. So I double check everything all the time. And then living in Israel, you deal with that all the time. You don't know which media outlet to trust. You don't you're constantly questioning everybody, and you read a story with nothing but questions. And is that true? And doubting everything.
So you're officially a Jew.
I think
yes.
You're a Jew.
I think that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Have you ever heard of Rabbi Sachs?
Definitely.
Yes. So we're huge fans of the late Rabbi Sachs, alav shalom. He would say that, what was his quote when regarding faith? Faith is the ability to live with doubt.
Yeah, it's the courage to live with doubt.
That's how he translated faith.
Because someone who says like, I have complete faith and blind faith and it's unwavering, a lot of times that's just like they're afraid to even hear the questions that challenge that faith. So they actually lack faith.
Yes.
But it's the people who are willing to fight through these doubts that actually have emunah, that actually have the true faith, because they're like, listen, whatever comes out of this, I'm okay with that, because you know what? I'm seeking something bigger and more true. So I'll take whatever hits I have to take. And it always ends up like, the beginning is always hard and it's painful, but then once you get past that hurdle, it's like everything, your whole perspective is so elevated, and it's like better than ever, So like, really, thank you for that. Segment was amazing. And
he also has a saying that I loved, and I actually, before Beyneynu, named it after something that Rabbi Sachs said, and it was about interfaith relationships. And he said we need to treat this with dignity, and we need to find dignity in our differences. So it was DID, dignity in differences. And as a way of like respecting each other and treating each other with respect.
Of course, there's definitely that. And this is where like it's going to lead into the next question that I have, because there's really like you're walking a tightrope when you're doing that, because